Have you heard about this? Apparently, some schools in a district in Ontario started removing books that were originally published before 2008. That was apparently the criteria. Any book older than 15 years was to be culled. And in September, when students started returning to school, they noticed that there weren't too many books in the library anymore. So it's not clear to me if this was a misinterpretation of a directive from the Ministry of Education, or the Ministry of Education issued a stupid directive and is now backpedaling. Who's at fault in this particular instance is not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is much more horrifying. I want to talk about my reaction when I heard that. You see, I wasn't surprised. And that's what's so scary to me. In 2008, I wouldn't have been able to conceive of books being removed from libraries based only on the date of publication. Nothing else. The world has changed a lot in the last 15 years. I'm no longer surprised because we are hearing more and more about canceling conversations, shutting down dialogue, narrowing thought. And along with all of that, of course, goes banning books. It's what we see going on in education from elementary school to university. There's a bunch of things we can't talk about, think about, or read about. My education, especially my university education, was so rich an experience because of my exposure to dialogue between contrary ideas. We have a different picture of campus life nowadays. Speakers are canceled. Rallies are organized not to push for freedom of speech, but to stand against freedom of speech. So it doesn't surprise me that people would want to control the books that high school students read. And yes, books that are older than 15 years old are different than books that are younger than 15 years old. That used to be reason enough to read them. You see, old books contain old ideas. And we've gotten to the point where some people believe that old ideas are bad ideas. This is, of course, ridiculous. Old books have bad ideas and good ideas in them. And new books have bad ideas and good ideas in them. And one of the main ways for us to sort out which ideas are good and which ones are bad is by reading both new books and old books and running those ideas up against each other. See that? Dialogue between contrary ideas. This used to be a good thing. But now I'm not surprised that some people want to shut down half of that dialogue. They'd rather have a monologue. In his essay entitled On Reading Old Books, C.S. Lewis warns us about the dangers of not reading old books. He says it's especially dangerous for young people to not read the old books. For one thing, new books are still on probation, if you will. There's a lot of books that are published every year, and a lot of them are bad, but some of them are good, and a very few of them are great. And it takes time for us as a society to sort out which is which. Lewis says that the hidden implications have to be brought to the light. The old books have gone through that process. The new books have not. And the amateur reader is not yet sufficiently equipped to see the dangers of a diet of only contemporary books. That's Lewis's first point. His second point is this: we can't often understand new books unless we've read a bunch of the old ones. He offers this analogy. If you join at 11 o'clock a conversation which began at 8, you will often not see the real bearing on what is said. Remarks which seem to you very ordinary will produce laughter or irritation, and you will not see why. The reason, of course, being at the early stages of the conversation have given them a special point. He's arguing for the need of a greater context by which we understand the new books. And this framework can only be acquired from the old books. Third point, new books need to be tested against the great truths of the past. Here's Lewis again. Every age has its own outlook. It is especially good at seeing certain truths and especially liable to make certain mistakes. We all, therefore, need books that will correct the characteristic mistakes of our own period. And that means the old books. Now, I know that I have just uttered a significant heresy in our modern North American culture. I have suggested that we should make judgments according to an external standard, and nowadays this is heresy. We now live in an age where we define truth, meaning, identity, and reality in the absence of such a standard. We abhor judgment and any external standard by which we might make one. This is one of the ideas, perhaps the main idea, that most needs interrogation by the wisdom of ages past. Now, before you start gathering sticks for the bonfire of my vanity, you need to hear this. Lewis does not think that old books are necessarily right. Their virtue is in their difference from the present age. To eliminate all the books published since 2008 would be just as stupid as removing the ones published before 2008. Lewis again. People were no cleverer then than they are now. They made as many mistakes as we, but not the same mistakes. They will not flatter us with errors that we are already committing. And their own errors, being now open and palpable, will not endanger us. Two heads are better than one. not because either is infallible, but because they are unlikely to go wrong in the same direction. To be sure, the books of the future would be just as good a corrective as the books of the past, but unfortunately we cannot get at them. The impulse to remove books published before 2008 from libraries is out there, and I won't be surprised when it happens, because one of our main problems today is that we suffer from chronological snobbery. Lewis defines this term, chronological snobbery, as the uncritical acceptance of the intellectual climate of our own age, and the assumption that whatever has gone out of date is on that count discredited. The idea here is that everything old is bad or false, or racist or misogynistic or bigoted or obscene or whatever. And the corollary belief is that everything new is good and true and beautiful. And of course, this is ridiculous. But some people either don't understand it's ridiculous or they just don't care. In Lewis's The Screwtape Letters, we read one side of a correspondence between a senior devil named Screwtape and his nephew, a junior devil named Wormwood. Throughout the letters, Screwtape lavishes his nephew with advice on how to further the purposes of hell in the world. The minions of hell are apparently very nervous about the contents of old books, and they work very hard to get us to regard them in such a way as to prevent our contamination by them. They do not want us to see them as a possible source of knowledge, as containing something that might cause us to modify our thoughts or our behavior. One of their strategies to prevent this is to create in our minds the historical point of view. Here's what Screwtape says in the 27th letter. Now remember, we are reading the words of a devil, yes? Since we cannot deceive the whole human race all the time, it is most important thus to cut every generation off from all the others. For where learning makes a free commerce between the ages, there is always the danger that the characteristic errors of one may be corrected by the characteristic truths of another. But thanks to Be Our Father, that's Satan, and the historical point of view, great scholars are now as little nourished by the past as the most ignorant mechanic who holds that history is bunk. Our education system should not reject old things because they are old, only because they are false when they are. And we should accept and reject new things according to the same standard. This is why the publication date of 2008 is so horrifying. How can anyone have the arrogance to think that they have the corner on all the knowledge and the wisdom? This way of thinking used to be limited to tyrannical maniacs and 18-year-old boys in the summer between their graduation and starting university or their first job in September. At least that was me. The cure used to be to read 3 good books and live past the age of 25. I now realize that we live in a different age, and this arrogance is no longer a surprise to me. I spoke earlier of our culture having abandoned the idea of an external standard by which to judge meaning and purpose and truth and the good or identity. This is just the most recent stage in a trajectory in the West that started a long time ago, toward more and more individualism. I've done some videos about this. Here's a quick summary. In our culture, God used to be the source of truth and meaning. We abandoned God and took up with reason as the source of truth and meaning. And then we abandoned reason. With nowhere else to go, truth or meaning moved inside us, inside individuals. And it seems to me that as a society, we accept this as a good thing. It's good that there is no external standard by which to judge right from wrong, truth from falsehood, what the good life or the meaning of life is. It's best that we, as individuals, decide for our individual selves. But there's a bit of a problem here. Without an external objective standard, on what basis do we resist every whim of those with the most power? We can't point to a universal principle and say this is wrong. Our only defense is, hey, I don't like that. So for a brief moment, someone may have thought someone wanted them to remove from the shelves of the school's library every book published before 2008. People push back. Thankfully, the people that did the pushing still have some power to resist, or there is still enough of a vestigial echo of some universal principle in our society that still has some influence. But there are various groups, liberal ones and conservative ones, and they want to restrict what we read and say and think, and the echoes of right and wrong are getting weaker. And at some point, someone with enough power will have the harebrained idea to restrict the reading of some books, and we might not be able to stop it, like we have in the past. There's this old book published in 1949, called 1984. It's written by George Orwell. In that book, the society is controlled by the all-powerful party. They have this slogan, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. So one day, someone with enough power in the present will attempt to control the past by restricting our children's access to it. And in this, they will be able to increase their control of even the future, because the clean breeze of the centuries will have ceased to blow through our minds. That's more Lewis. And when that happens, I won't be surprised. And that really scares me. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.